You are listening to the Hiking Radio Network, where we talk the walk with shows by hikers, about hikers, for everybody.
Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, the ultimate midlife crisis. Join Steve and his guests every week as he staggers from Georgia to Maine.
Hi everybody, and thanks to one and all for coming back to check in with me once more. You're all welcome, and you're listening to Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, the ultimate midlife crisis. This is the show where I chat with random guests who have done something fairly extraordinary, in that they've committed themselves to uprooting their lives and taking on one of America's or the world's long-distance trails. These stories are sometimes funny, well at least I laugh and often find them funny. They can be sad, but they're often uplifting, which is what a lot of you tell me when you write to me at steve@hikingradionetwork.com. This week, well, you're going to have to wait to hear from him, but Alan Carpenter has a story of perseverance which I almost couldn't believe. One of my buddies, Clay Bonneman Evans, reached out to me and suggested I chat with Alan. He says he has an astounding story. And as so often happens, actually, Clay was spot on. We'll be hearing from Alan soon. Then Julie Judkins, Director of Education and Outreach at the Appalachian Trail Conservancy, discusses how the ATC is trying to make the trail more accessible to communities who may not always be best positioned to hike. As you're going to hear, it is a delicate subject, and I don't help by asking her a delicate question or two. Julie will be on after Alan. I'm afraid that I've been unable to catch up with Mr. President Bill Tickler this week. I knew that he was heading home and it was likely we wouldn't be able to connect, but that has turned out to be the case. I really want to do a final catch up with Bill, so we'll hopefully get that done in the coming week for next week's show. Stepping into the breach, so to speak, will be Wim Shanken from Hiker Medals. I recently saw this striking medal that he's done and wanted him to pop onto the show to tell you all about it. And finally today, we had the start of a new book. This one is Walking the Appalachian Trail by Larry Luxembourg. Larry is the president of the Appalachian Trail Museum and a marvellous raconteur. I had the pleasure of hosting Larry at the Appalachian Trail Club of Florida Zoom meeting recently, and he was terrific. I asked if I could read his 1994 book on my show, and he agreed. And I don't think I could better describe this book by quoting from the very first sentence of the foreword, which states, "The subject of this book is nothing less than an Appalachian Trail continuum through time and space." That was by Morris J. Forrester Jr., and I loved it. Larry wrote his book in the 90s, so I think you'll be fascinated by some of the obvious changes that have happened since the book came out more than a quarter of a century ago. You'll be hearing me read from Larry's book at the end of the show. So let's get on. Prepare to be inspired by Alan Carpenter. Here is Alan. Well, this week we have another recommendation from a listener. This time it's from my buddy Clay Bonneman Evans, or Pony. He sent me an email about a serial hiking overachiever. This is Alan Carpenter. Hi, Alan. How are you?
I'm terrific. Thank you very much, Steve.
You apparently like the introduction of a serial hiking overachiever.
The serial part is especially good.
Yeah, slightly worrying, isn't it, really?
Yes, like Son of Sam.
And you don't have a trail name, do you?
I do not.
Why is that? I've rarely met people who don't have a trail name.
Well, I'm a contrarian at heart, which is probably a sign of a major character defect. But if everybody else has a trail name, I don't want to have a trail name. I mean, isn't that infantile?
Oh, fantastically infantile and wonderful at the same time. So did people try to name you?
Yes, my daughter wanted me to be called Boomer. I'm a baby boomer, so that would have fit. Another possibility would have been Outlier, because I'm almost an outlier in terms of the age distribution.
Yeah.
And one of my colleagues I met on the Continental Divide Trail wanted to call me Little Alan, which was kind of nice too. Alan was good enough.
Yeah, Alan's good enough. So you're definitely Alan on the trail. And you're a serial hiking overachiever, as I say, but you really came to it relatively late. So did you have much of a hiking background when you were a youngster?
Well, I guess it depends on what you call a youngster, but I was in Boy Scouts starting when I was maybe 10 through 16, something like that. I went through the whole program because growing up in Champaign, Illinois, where it's flat, there are limited opportunities to get outside and do things, except for the Boy Scouts back then. So I joined up with the Boy Scouts, and we got to go on camping trips. We got to go up to Quetico Provincial Park and go canoeing in Ontario. We went to Philmont, which was my first backpacking trip, I think in 1960 when I was about 14, something like that.
All right.
But then I didn't really get the bug, I guess, back then. Yeah. And I went hiking when I was a young adult, but it never really got to me until late in life.
Isn't it funny how that happens to some people? You and I were similar, like in the same way. Although you've done much more than I have. You didn't come to. I mean, I came to long distance hiking when I was 61, but you were 65 for your first long distance hike, weren't you?
Actually, I was 61.
I've got
my
notes are entirely wrong there. You were 61, okay, and you're now 74.
I'll be 74 next week.
All right. That's sort of somewhat ironic. I'll be 68 next week.
All right.
So what date? When's your birthday?
The 30th of October, just before Halloween.
I'm on the 29th, just before you.
Oh, wonderful.
Oh, cool. We're both Scorpios. I think that might have something to do with the outlier sort of thing.
Well, maybe.
So let's get into the long distance hiking. How did the idea of a long distance hike come onto your radar in the first place?
It was entirely, I think, a chance event. One December evening in 2007 in Boulder, Colorado, where I live, snowy, cold, I was surfing the web, and somehow I came across a website for the John Muir Trail in California. Right. So this guy that had hiked the trail the previous year posted 100 photographs that he took along his hike. Nice. As I looked at those photographs, my mouth dropped open, my eyes bugged out. I was just mesmerized by those stunning photographs. And in a fit of irrational exuberance, I vowed right there, I'm going to hike the entire John Muir Trail next summer.
Good Lord. So what did your wife say to that then?
Yeah, my wife has been so wonderful in supporting my long-distance hiking affliction. And I don't think she quite knew what I was getting into. I didn't know what I was getting into. But she said, yeah, sure, go right ahead. In fact, I recruited her, and with much more difficulty, our 13-year-old son at the time, Riley, to start the John Muir Trail the following summer in 2008.
And they agreed to that, did they?
Yes, Betsy much more willingly than Riley did.
I'm sure, but you couldn't leave him at home, so he had to go with you, didn't he? Really? So
yes, he was. Yes, exactly.
So looking at the prospect of doing a long distance trail before you set off, what were your expectations of how you do? Did you think you'd finish it, or did you think, well, I just see how far I can go?
I was determined to do the whole thing in one go, to finish it as a through hiker, as it were.
Yeah.
I wasn't sure how to do that. But I had this it turned out, great idea. Somehow I found what's it called, trailjournals.com.
Yeah.
And I went online and looked for journals of hikers who were older, out of shape physically, at least from their appearance, overweight, or seemingly really inexperienced. Uh-huh. And I thought, well, if these guys can do that, I can do it. It was like bottom fishing. And in watching those videos of these people, well, hey, they did it. Why can't I? So that was really the mental space that I got into. And once I was in that space, I thought, okay, I can do this. I'm not quite sure of all the details, like resupply, for example. But mentally, I knew I was going to do it. It was just figuring out the how.
That is, I think you've got to have that in your mind. And certainly it's one of the things that appears to have been the fear of a lot of people when they do a long distance hike. The fear of not finishing is quite one of the things that comes up so regularly to me. But you were pretty sure you could do it. So, because did you have to get a permit back then or not? So you have to get a permit now.
Yes, even back then, which was easier to do.
Yeah, I'm sure.
It took me a while to get a permit.
Right.
And in 2008, with my wife and son, we couldn't get a permit for the three of us from the Happy Isles trailhead, which is where most
Sure.
people start. So we
Right.
started from Glacier Point with sort of, you could see the Happy Owls visitor trailhead from Glacier Point, but it's about, 4,000 feet higher in elevation.
Oh, gosh,
So
yeah.
that worked out okay.
So how did you all prepare then physically and your gear and, the whole logistical side of things? Because that's a trail that you have to plan really well in terms of resupply, don't you?
It helps. It helps, especially for people like me who don't know what we're doing. I
resemble that remark.
Well, I went online and I searched for lightweight gear, and I'd press return, and I'd get the REI site, or I'd get some other site, and then I'd look at the weights of these various things: the pack, the sleeping bag, and the tent, and these were heavy. And I kept thinking, well, maybe ultralight gear. I'd type that in, and I'd get the same thing. And I got very frustrated, thinking there's got to be lighter versions of these heavy items that I have, including my aluminum frame wilderness experience backpack that weighed 5.5 pounds.
Nice.
It worked just fine, but there's got to be something lighter than that. I couldn't find it. Oh. So I thought, well, okay, I'll just use that stuff. And by the way, so did my wife Betsy with her Kelty Tioga freighter pack.
So this poor 13-year-old kid you're also pulling uphill. What was that? What did he carry then?
He had a pack. At 13, he was tougher than mom and dad.
All right.
In terms of physical wherewithal. So mainly for him, it was, oh, Lordy, I got to spend all this time with mom and dad. What did I do to deserve this? Yeah. So
I feel for him straight away.
Yeah. So he was physically, he would go ahead of us, but mentally it was like more of an inflicted episode he didn't really want to have.
And then she left you after 40 miles, but that was preordained or pre-decided.
Right.
So what did that feel like? Because I think the dynamic of hiking with a partner changes things, whether or not they're a romantic partner or a life partner or just a friend. How different was your hike after your wife and your son left, to what it was like after, before?
I was sad. I didn't want to see him go.
Right.
But just Betsy had to get back to work, and the deal we made with Riley he would only hike for, I think it was 4 days. So I was sad. I watched him go, and I continued on, and I was by myself, and I wasn't afraid or anything physically or whatever, but it was like, wait a minute, I want to meet somebody. I want to hike with somebody. And fortunately, later that day, I met this guy, and we hiked together for a little bit. So that was really nice. But just for me, I'm a slow hiker, and I can't keep up with the vast majority of other hikers. But camping with someone at night for me is the big deal. Because then we can chat and talk about the day and do that sort of stuff.
Some people do love the idea of the wilderness and get away, which I entirely understand as well. But I think I'd be pretty, and I've thought about some of the thru hikers this year for the 2020 on the AT and on the PCT. It must have been tough for them not to share the friendship experiences that you and I have shared on the various trails that we've done. And I always enjoyed hiking around other people or being around other people at night. It's so much part of the trail for me is that social side of things. Is that how you feel?
Exactly. And I think on the AT, to me, the biggest draw of the AT is other people.
Yeah, I agree.
There are lots of people, which may be a little more than some folks want.
Yes.
But for me, it was great because I could camp with someone pretty much every night. I'd say 9 out of 10 nights I could camp in close proximity to somebody else, usually right next to a shelter where I'd put up my tent because there are a lot of snorers in the shelters that would keep me awake. Uh-oh.
I just put my hand up. The audience wouldn't have, listeners would have seen that. And were the pictures that you saw on the John Muir Trail from that website, were they as good as in real life, or were they better than? Because I always feel that the pictures, however great they are, never show us what it really looks like, do they?
Well, in a sense, yes. They didn't show what it really looks like, but the experience, including the scenery and the people I met and just the physical challenge of it all, was more than I expected.
Yeah.
It was just super.
And you also, you're able to cope with the elevation, because that was the thing that got me off. Were you okay with that?
Yes, I live in Boulder, Colorado at 5,400 feet. So that I had more red blood cells than you did when you started the JMT, which is really helpful. Plus, before I did the hike, I asked my friend Will Murray, who's a local triathlete and Ironman competitor and coach, could you please, Will, give me some ideas of physical training stuff to do? And he did. And I followed him. And I'm glad I did. Because when I showed up for the trail, along with my wife and son, I wasn't in top shape. I wasn't in trail shape, but at least I was in good enough shape that I could keep going long enough to get into trail shape. Yeah, so that made a huge difference.
Only doing the trail can get you in trail shape, can't it really? I mean, it's almost impossible to be prepared for this physically, I think.
Right. I think it's a practical
get those miles
matter.
in your legs. Yeah. And so you did. Right. You got to Whitney, you headed down. You got some problem with your legs. You got plantar fasciitis, I understand.
Yes.
You resolved that okay. And then 4 years later, and I presume you were then in your late 60s, you took on a much longer trail, the PCT. How did that go?
Well, it was, I guess my story of the PCT could be called Ups and Downs on the Pacific Crest Trail, literally and figuratively.
Yeah.
So after I finished the John Muir Trail, I started thinking a lot about the Pacific Crest Trail because I met people on the JMT that knew about the PCT. Plus, I realized that about, 175 miles?
Yeah, about 170 miles,
of the PCT and the John Muir Trail coincide. And I thought, wow, this is really cool. And there's more of that out there? As in 10, 15 times more than that? Ooh, wow, yes. And so during the winter, after I got back from the John Muir Trail and my foot calmed down, in another fit of irrational exuberance, I vowed I'm hiking the entire Pacific Crest Trail in one go.
Good Lord.
With no idea how to actually do that. So life got in the way, and it took me a while to actually get out there. But in 2013, April the 20th, I started the hike. And it's the greatest thing I've ever done.
Wow. How interesting.
It was a life-changing experience. And there were several aspects to all that.
Nearly life-ending, wasn't it, at one stage?
Well, that's true. And that's part of, yes, that's part of why it was so great in a kind of odd sort of way.
Tell us about that. Tell us about the good bit first. Or it was life-changing in a good way. And then tell us about how it was pretty bad.
Right. Well, it's a really wonderful trail as a physical entity. It's well designed, laid out, maintained, the whole 9 yards, which it's not easy, but it's a lot easier than the AT in some respects because the AT is not nearly as nice a trail as a physical item. Sure. I really enjoyed Southern California, the quote unquote desert part. I'm an ecologist by training, and seeing all the wonderful variety of plants and plant communities, wildflowers and all that stuff in Southern California. Yes, there's long water holes and all that, but it was so wonderful. The Sierras, you can't not like the Sierras if you like to get outside. But I got lonely in the Sierras, and there weren't not a whole lot of people at that time where I was, and I was camping by myself much of the time. And I tried to hook up with these two folks from Switzerland, Patrick and Sharon, but they wanted to be by themselves. I was kind of a third wheel on the vehicle, and that just didn't work out, which is no reflection on them. So I kind of got to the point where I don't know if I want to do this anymore when I was heading north from Tuolumne Meadows. So at mile 1061, it turns out, this was on day 58, I believe, of my trip. I was kind of want some more company, and I don't know what I'm going to do. And so I got to this really steep area on the north side of Mount Raymond in the McCollum Wilderness, out in the middle of nowhere. This is about 30 miles south of South Lake Tahoe. So I came around the north side of the mountain, and I came to this stretch of trail, 20 feet long, that was covered with a sort of skating rink of ice. It was not too long, but it was right at the edge of a really steep ravine that was full of snow and ice.
Nasty.
So I stood there thinking, well, okay, what do I do? And zombies took over my conscious mind. And as I stood there, I thought, I'm only 30 miles south of South Lake Tahoe and the all-you-can-eat buffet at Harris Casino. And if I keep going, I can get there tomorrow. And I started to walk across that. I took about 2 steps and I slipped and I rocketed about 100 feet down that icy gully and slammed into a boulder.
Wow. You're lucky you didn't kill yourself. That could have been
I
really
was very
life-changing,
lucky. That's right. I was very lucky.
But you weren't lucky enough, were you?
Well, I don't know quite how to...
Luck is relative, I guess.
Yeah.
But...
Well, I was stupid in the beginning. I just can't account rationally for why I just didn't stop, sit down, turn around, go back on the trail, and go around that area. Sure. It would have been easy to do, but I didn't. But I got rescued. The Matt and Joe from the California Highway Patrol rescued me in their helicopter. I don't know how they landed it on that mountainside, but they did. I thought they were going to crash. And as they were coming down with, the rotors pelting me with rocks and crap, and I thought, oh, man, they're going to crash and we're all going to be dead. Jeez. But they didn't. And they rescued me and took me to the hospital. It was amazing.
You weren't finished with the PCT, were you? You went back again.
No, because when I got home, something happened in my mind. I can't explain why. Because when I got to that stretch of icy trail, I was kind of down in the dumps. I was lonesome, and I don't know if I'm going to go past South Lake Tahoe or not.
Sure.
But when I got home, then I realized, remember the Joni Mitchell song, You Don't Know What You've Got Till It's Gone?
Oh, yeah.
That's
good one.
What happened
nice one.
to me.
Yeah.
And I thought, wow, I love the trail. I want to get back on the trail. But here I was. My ribs were broken and my lung was all messed up and I had all these cuts and holes in my leg. And so I said, well, what do I do? And I said, well, I got to get better. And so I went on this quest to get better. And I was so motivated, I'll do anything to get better. Just tell me what to do and I'll do it. And so I found out myself what I needed to do. And I ended up writing a book about this, by the way. And I then got back on the trail the following year, about 10 miles before the place where I fell. So when I got to that same place, no ice in 2014, another low snow year, I looked down that what was a gully, icy gully. And I thought, there's no way I survived that. And there's no way I was able to crawl back up that rocky mountainside next to the gully, as hurt as I was, but I did.
You did it, and you got past. You got to the end, I presume.
I did.
You got to the end. So you've now done the PCT on the John Muir Trail, and that would be enough for a lot of people. And I know you've done some of the CDT, but you've done so much we haven't got time for that. but in 2016, where you met my friend Pony, you went for the AT with the experience of the PCT pretty fresh in your mind.
Yes.
Had you started to entertain any doubts about your ability to do another long distance hike? Did you feel that age was catching up with you a little bit or not? Because you look much younger than me right now, so you look pretty
no,
spry.
I don't think I had any particular doubts. I knew enough to do my homework. So I read books about the AT and got the guidebook, the AWOL guidebook, and all this to talk to people. So I knew that the whites were going to be tough, especially since I wasn't 25 anymore, and I knew Southern Maine was going to be tough.
Yeah.
I started from the south because that struck me as an easier way to sort of ease into the trail rather than starting from Mount Katahdin.
It certainly allows you to build up. And I always think that people say, how am I going to be getting through the whites and so on? Well, you've got nearly 2,000 miles in your legs by then. So if you've got that far, you should be okay to get through the whites and Maine. But there's no question they are tough. And irony of ironies, you actually had to get off the trail, didn't you? But you got off the trail at Hanover, which is the gateway to those two states. So
yes.
What happened there?
Well, there were two things. Actually, when I was coming down from Bear Mountain toward the Hudson River,
Uh-huh.
something happened to my right knee. And there were a series of steps that I remember where the distance from step A to step B going down was way too far. And I remember feeling when I dropped down and just wham, my foot would hit. And then the other foot, wham, it would hit. And wham.
Yeah, yeah.
And by the time I got down to Bear Mountain, I could barely walk. So I was really hurting. So it turns out I went home for a couple of days because I didn't know who I could see near Bear Mountain to look at my knee.
Sure.
And I had several people look at my knee and they just said, nah, it's fine. You just beat it up for a while. Go back to the trail and start hiking. So I did. So I went and I hiked up to Hanover. And it turns out that my mom, who was 93 at the time, was moving from her long-term home in Illinois to the Denver area to live in a retirement community.
Mm-hmm.
But in that process, she ended up damaging her lower back. And she was having problems. So I decided, as a dutiful son, I needed to go back home to Boulder and to help my brother and sister-in-law look after my mom. So I reluctantly left the trail and then went back to be a good son. And I did not do any more of the trail in 2016.
Yeah. And yet, of course, once again, you weren't done, were you? And this is what comes back to the thought of, as you said, it's easier to go from south to north because you're prepared for those two last states, but you had to start effectively from scratch at the beginning of New Hampshire. What was that like, restarting from New Hampshire?
Well, I knew it was going to be hard, and I trained extra hard.
Right.
And also mentally, at least I knew I'd walk that far, and I was able to deal with the rocks in Pennsylvania and the mud in Vermont. So I had a reasonable degree of confidence that I could do this.
Sure.
So I guess that my first real awakening experience was not going up to the top of Mount Musalaki, which is a serious haul, but going down the other side. Because down the other side, it looked to me like the trail, quote unquote, was an old road that went straight downhill. And when I started doing that, I thought, holy smokes, what is this? So I actually had to not walk on the trail so much as walk next to the trail, going from tree to tree, sort of like a terrestrial monkey, sort of going down the trail.
You sort of let yourself down by the roots of the previous tree, don't you? It's amazing how you can do that.
That's right. Man, that was hard. But I did it. I survived, just being very careful.
And you got down there, people were probably thinking, well, he got through there, fantastic, he's going to finish it. You got through the whites, you got the presidentials. But then I read your blog post this morning and saw pictures of what I would call the aftermath of going through Mahoosuc Notch when you were pretty much smashed up, weren't you? What did you decide to do? And I know you regretted this.
Yeah. Well, Mahoosuc Notch I knew was going to be hard. Well, for me, there were people that say it was the best part of the trail, but for me, I just could not quite imagine.
I loved it.
Being in that mental space. So when I was scrambling and crawling and all that, I whacked my shins, knees, and elbows and the whole deal so many times.
Sure did.
I probably should have had long pants on, but I didn't have any long pants except for my rain pants, and I wasn't going to mess them up because I'm older and my skin just doesn't have the durability that 25-year-old skin does. So I got through that and headed on downhill. And at one point I got to this little flat spot and just looked at my legs. And there were all these other people sitting there that I'd met at the Notch. And they looked at me like, what happened to you? I had blood, caked blood all over my legs. And I just, my confidence evaporated.
Wow.
So I couldn't stay there. I had to get down to Grafton Notch. So I started downhill, and my balance is not what it used to be. And it took every bit of concentration I could muster going downhill. Plus, it was steep enough that it hurt my ankles and my knees. And I'm thinking, I'm going to fall down and break my leg. And I thought, I got rescued once. I am not going to let this happen again. I just not going to let it happen. And I went down and down and finally got to Grafton Notch and kind of
It's a long way down, isn't it? It's a long, long way down.
It is a long way down. It's
and if you're
much
not feeling
harder.
confident, you're going down there, that saps your confidence even more, doesn't it?
Oh, yeah. I had zero confidence when I got to the bottom.
Yeah.
And I was just in a mental space of get me out of here. Yeah. And I'm sitting there thinking, okay, now what do I do? And I'm thinking, I knew from the guidebook and the elevation trace in the guidebook, then it was steep up and a steep down. And I wasn't so much worried about the steep up getting hurt, but it was the steep down.
Don't you think the north sides of those mountains look so bad on the charts, and yet they're probably even worse when you do them, aren't they?
Oh yeah, yes. I don't think the AT or the AWOL guidebook quite gets it right in some places,
No.
because sometimes it was like, holy cow.
Yeah.
But anyway, what I did was I decided I'm done, and that was a poor decision on my part. What I should have done was to get a ride down to Bethel or some little town nearby. I can't remember what it was, and just stay in a motel for a couple of days, and eat a lot of milkshakes and pizza and beer and all that stuff, and then then decide what do I want to do. But I made a hasty decision that I regret, and it turns out that as I'm sitting there, this mental state, this gal, Vivian was her name, walks by, and I go up to her and say, "Excuse me, I need a ride to Portland so I can go to my cousin's house. Could you give me a lift?" And she says, "Sure, I'm going to Portland." It's like, really?
And she lived about a mile from your cousin, didn't she, or something like that?
It turns out she did. And then
amazing.
It turns out there was another hiker who needed a ride into town where I should have stayed for a few days. We went along. But that experience just encapsulates so much of what's so wonderful about the Appalachian Trail and long-distance hiking in general. The people I met, the help I got from complete strangers, that it changed me. I'm a much more grateful and generous person now than I was before. I mean, not that I was a Scrooge beforehand, but it just experiencing that on a daily basis, not just once or twice, but a daily basis. And I think if more people actually did stuff like that, they would change the world, because every long distance hiker I've ever talked to, I'll ask, are you a more generous person, a grateful person now because of all the help you got from other people? And they all say, oh yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely. So now, once again, listeners are thinking, he's got to be done now. It's not going to happen. But life still had a few twists and turns for you. And in 2019, you and your wife took on the not insubstantial task of cycling across the country. I mean, that's probably another story in its own right, but I'm more interested in what happened at the end of your 3,000-mile bike ride. Yeah. Where did you finish, and what did you do then?
Yeah, we finished in Bar Harbor, Maine. We started in Washington, went to Bar Harbor. The idea was going across the country would tone up my legs enough that I would have enough strength to actually do southern Maine.
Right.
That was the theory. So we finished the trail and took a day off and went sightseeing. Then we got on a bus to Portland and went to stay overnight with Vivian and her husband, which was so sweet and wonderful. Sure. Then Betsy rented a car and drove me up to Grafton Notch. And there was just no doubt I'm going to finish the trail, period, the end. So she took me up there, dropped me off, and I started uphill, and holy smokes, this is steep. And when I got to the top and went down the other side, it was even worse. My right leg, the going down muscles in my right leg just said, "Sorry, Buster." Yeah. And I just limped along, and it hurt. And at one point, I had to sit down several times just to let my leg recover. I wasn't sure I was going to get to the bottom. And I said, what am I going to do if I can't get to the bottom? And actually, I went backwards for a while. It's kind of like crab-like going down.
Jeez.
That didn't work so well. But finally, I got to a little road, I think. It was maybe 3/4 of a mile from East Bee Hill Road, where you can get down to Andover. Yep. And I called up was it called the Red Hen? I think a restaurant, and they let you camp in the backyard. So I said, my name's Alan. I just go, could you please pick me up? And they said, sure. Really? Oh, yes. So that gave me the motivation to limp and crawl and walk that last 3/4 of a mile to the road.
But then what happened?
Well, I got down there and stayed. I had a huge dinner. It was all you can eat pizza that night, Friday night. Ooh,
Nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that. Yeah.
Well, I stayed overnight, and then the nice people gave me a ride back up to the place where I got off. And I thought, I'm going to do it. I don't know how I'm going to do it, but I'm going to do it. And it was the same story the next day. It was so hard. Yeah. But I wasn't going to give up.
But you limped on. You limped on. You kept going.
I limped on.
So now everyone's thinking, and you got to Baxter State Park, and you started climbing Katahdin. So everyone should be cheering by now. So tell us what happened then.
Yeah. Well,
oh dear.
So the idea was I stayed with my friend at A-Ball Bridge. Mm-hmm. The previous night. It was a beautiful view of Katahdin across the Kennebec River there, by the way. So then we hiked up. We got the permit to stay at the Birch's campground.
Birch's, yeah.
So Lazarus was his name. He went on ahead. He's a younger, speedier hiker. So when I got the Birch's campground at 10:30, I thought, well, I'll stay overnight. He went on ahead. Beautiful day, and I should have done the same thing. I just did not have enough confidence in my strength because, well, the next day is supposed to be nice until 4 p.m. Okay, I can do that. So I slept overnight at Birch's, got up at 5 o'clock, and I'm on the trail at 5:30 with my day pack, and at 8:30 it starts to rain. So I kept going higher and higher, and I get wet. I'm soaked. I'm cold, and then my fingers start to stiffen up. And I know from personal experience, when that happens, if they get stiff where I can't bend them, I'm cooked. Sure. Because I can't unbend them. I'm too cold to put my hands in my pockets, which are all wet. So I got up to the point where the trail doesn't get steep. It's sort of flat-ish for a while.
The table ends.
The table, thank you.
Yeah.
So I'm sitting there on a rock. It's raining. The clouds are all over the place. And I thought, what do I do? And I thought, well, if I get hurt, I'm going to have to be rescued. And if the weather's awful, and I don't want to subject people to have to rescue me because I just want to get to the top.
Sure.
So Alan, kind of be smart, turn around and go back.
Oh my God!
And
that must have been devastating to do.
What a bummer. And when I'm going downhill, I went past the people that I camped with at Birch's, and they were so sweet and nice. And then as I got a little farther down, I went past younger hikers who had no rain gear, in their T-shirts, no gloves, going uphill. And they're okay.
They could give a crap, couldn't they?
I started feeling kind of sorry for myself. Oh, come on. Here I had my rain gear, my rain pants, and the gloves, and the stocking cap, and all this stuff, and I can't stay warm.
Wow.
Oh, well.
So that's it. No Katahdin picture for you. But is there? I can hardly believe I'm saying this. What do you plan to do in 2021?
Well, let's see, 2021. Yeah. So next summer, my wife and I are going to do 2 bike rides, one on the Pacific coast from Vancouver down to the Mexican border, and then one back up through the Sierras and the Cascades back up to the Canadian border. Right. That's about 4,300 miles, I think.
No problem. Yeah.
So that'll get me toughened up enough, I hope. And this leg injury and hip injury that I've got now will have gone away, I hope, by then. And then when we get back home, Betsy will drive me up to South Pass, Wyoming, and I'll get back on the Continental Divide Trail, and I will finish. And then in 2022, when I think my daughter will be living in Boston, then I'll fly out to the East Coast, and hopefully she and I will drive up to Millinocket, and we'll finish Katahdin.
I'll tell you what, man, I'm exhausted just by listening to what you've just said. The way in which the people want this picture of the top of Katahdin so much that they're prepared to do all sorts of things for it. You've gone back and back and back, and you're still there, and you're still a mile short. That is just amazing. It really is truly amazing. Your determination and dedication. So you'll be 75, 76 by then, won't you? Nearly 76.
75, yeah, right.
And to do it with your daughter, that must be really special. So I think that will be another wonderful thing as well.
Oh, sure. She's a tough hiker. She's a much stronger hiker than I am. So she'll be able to help out doddering old dad if he has difficulties.
Do you think you'll ever stop? Do you think you'll ever stop, Alan? I mean,
well, yes, I can assure you I will stop someday.
Yeah. No, but because why do you do this at this age, and what do you think it gives you? And as I said to you, you look so well. I know the listeners can't see you, but you look so darn well. What has it given you?
That is really the good question. Well, one, I know that the physical preparation I do for these hikes, as well as hiking, plus the other healthy choices I make,
of course,
life is better because of that. I feel better. I have more energy. I don't have any chronic conditions. I can do stuff, not as well as maybe I could when I was 25 in the hiking department, but my limitations are pretty minimal right now. And I think life is more enjoyable as a consequence. And as far as hiking is concerned, I guess I'm hooked on experiencing the generosity of other people.
Yeah.
To get back on the trail, on the bike for one, and on the trail, I'll meet these wonderful people. And when I'm sitting by the side of the road with a flat tire and can't quite get the casing back over the rim, and some guy shows up and say, "Here, let me help you with that." Yes. Oh, that is so wonderful. And the contrast, I don't watch television much, but I guess if you watch the TV news, it's mayhem and murders and all this other political nonsense that's going on. And the contrast couldn't be greater of these nice people showing up from like who knows where, helping me out and giving me advice and patting me on the head. It's just so wonderful, the feeling of that.
Yeah, there's true magic. There's true magic out there, isn't there? It feels like magic. Things happen at a time when you really need that help, don't you? And
yes.
that woman taking you to Portland and happened to be living just less than a mile from your cousin. It's just this sort of thing doesn't happen. Well, it probably does happen coincidentally, but man, it happens so often, doesn't it?
Yes. There must be something else besides chance. I don't know what it is exactly, but it is just so wonderful. And plus also I get to see places on my bike and on foot up close that I haven't seen before. And it's a completely different experience, obviously, at 2 miles an hour rather than 65 miles an hour.
Yes,
so I can stop and look at the plants and look at the ground squirrels and the rocks and enjoy the sky and all that stuff. And just be there with it. Well, look,
I'm very hopeful that people find you as inspirational as I do, and I think you've an amazing. When I said serial overachiever, I wasn't pulling your chain or anything like that. You really are. So I really appreciate you coming on and talking to us, and hope you let me know when you've finished the last mile in Katahdin.
Well, thank you. I will do that, and I appreciate being with you today, Steve.
I appreciate it. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Now, if that's not persistence, then I don't know what is. I don't think I could be that way. I think that once I committed to the trail, I was definitely all in. But I also knew that once it was over, I'd be done. I'm not sure I could have summoned the courage to do it again and again in the way that he did. I mean, that's what section hikers do. But for Alan, it was always a through hike. I loved his attitude. Thanks goes this week to Suzanne Johnson, who pressed the donate button on our hikingradionetwork.com website. It really helps when people step up like this. I had another big bill to pay to repair my Mac this week, so I'm always grateful when I can see sums of money coming into the account. If you like what we're doing with the show, I hope that you'll feel happy to donate, either a one-off sum or a monthly donation. Thank you so much. Now it's the ATC and a thorny subject. Here's Julie Judkins. I'd like to introduce you to yet somebody else from the ATC. This is Julie Judkins, Director of Education and Outreach. Hi, Julie. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you.
Good. Now, as I've told Julie, I'm been a bit rushed this morning. I've only just got in from my walk. So I've been trying to work out what notes I'd taken. I've lost all my notes as well. But I know your subject is new voices, more choices, education and action for justice, equity and inclusion on the AT. But all of that apparently is summed up in a Star Wars reference. So tell us what Jedi is, because you can't beat having a Jedi involved.
Yes. Well, the Force can be with you on this. So, but Jedi stands for Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. Mm-hmm. And it's our hope in moving the Appalachian Trail Conservancy to a culture of inclusion and Jedi, that we will be a more resilient, open, and welcoming organization to donors, hikers, volunteers, and the next generation of stewards.
But that, you must have realized that didn't exist before, or somebody did. What was the process to make the need to do this?
Well, I would say we have been working on it a bit. We had Ron Tipton was our executive director a few years back when we had a strategic plan that talked about broader relevancy and how we can really be thinking about the benefits of the Appalachian Trail for more people that might not be represented within our workforce, within our volunteer corps, and even on the trail. And so that really started us in doing a good bit of research and inner thinking. And so that was a 5-year process, and we really launched our education and outreach programs externally and did a lot of homework internally, and did things like start a Next Generation Advisory Council where we're getting wonderful advice from young people up and down the trail and across the nation, really. And to a more focused place where we are now, although it's continuing on that, what I call our kind of equity journey of learning continuously and auditing our practices, our programs, both internally and externally. So
this is always going to be a dynamic program, though, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
As it absolutely should be. But it's the recognition that you needed it. I know when I spoke with Suzanne, I spoke with Ron as well, actually, on the show. But when I spoke with Suzanne, I'd realised how some of your newer organisations within the organisation were more diverse. So there obviously was a representation, a lack of representation. Is the idea to get the trail to reflect America, or is the idea to get the trail to reflect hikers? Because by and large, when I was on the trail, it was basically white dudes and more and more white women, to be fair. But basically, there was very little, as it were, representation from Latin people or Black people, and I was kind of surprised how it didn't reflect America. Do you regard it as a problem that it doesn't?
Yes.
Okay.
I think we want the Appalachian Trail Conservancy to reflect that, but also we want to be a resource for communities and businesses and partners and our greater ecosystem, as we're calling it, to support BIPOC communities, to Black, Indigenous, people of color, and LGBTQ plus communities. So just to have a more welcoming atmosphere and to make sure that we are doing our work in a way that will welcome all to come and experience it.
Have you done any work on why there is such a lack of diversity on the trail, has been over the years? I'm sure it's changed in the last year or two, and I noticed definitely it did change a little bit when I went in 2019. So have you identified the reasons why a lot of Black communities will not go in the woods?
I think that we have, as a country, a lot of history that is in every community and in every sector, and every organization had a system built on colonization, built on trauma for different communities of color. And I think that there's a recognition of that injustice, and that the barriers for marginalized communities. I think that we're seeing more and more of that become visible through some of our own homework and some of our own work to recognize our own biases, to uncover stories of acquisition for the land, for the way that the trail was built, and the way that our public lands were established. So I think there's been a growing amount of learning and understanding and visibility within that history.
Do you know what's fascinating for me, though? I'm watching you not struggle to articulate it, because you're articulating it very well, but in my opinion, but this is an uncomfortable conversation for some people to have. And I also know, and you're the director of education outreach, and you don't look entirely comfortable that I've asked the question, but maybe you are. But I know half of some of my audience will be thinking, what the bloody hell is he talking about that again for? But I think it's really important to talk about it, and to talk about it have a conversation in a way which is not vindictive. It's not pejorative. It needs to be an open conversation that we recognize that we want more people out there. And generally, I always resisted this idea of interviewing a black hiker or a gay hiker. I'd rather interview a hiker who happens to be black, or a hiker who happens to be gay. That's what I'd rather do, And yet I know people, we kind of dance around it a bit too much.
It is uncomfortable. And I think that part of the learning that I've gone through personally, as a white person that has grown up in privilege and is being more comfortable with that discomfort. So allowing the conversation to bubble up, even though it might immediately you want to kind of feel defensive and find the reasons why, but that's the biggest part of the learning for me. And I think that as an organization, a lot of those acknowledgments that we're putting out there are also just really important, so that if we come to these conversations from a place of empathy and compassion and openness, that it will allow us to get a lot further down the road.
I agree with you. So what initiatives do you actually undertake in terms of outreach? What do you work, for example, what are you working on right now?
Yeah. So I lead our external facing programs, such as our community partnerships, our designated trail communities, of which we've got about 50 in our network.
Wow.
I work with education and providing professional development training to teachers K through 12. We focus on place-based service learning. And we right now have an adventure series that's happening for young people as well, to be a support for teachers during COVID and to have those resources available. I also lead programs for young people. So the idea of bringing groups together within coalitions. So we work with non-traditional partners alongside our traditional partners, like our trail clubs and agencies. But I'll provide a model in Georgia, for example, that's wonderful. We work with the Greening Youth Foundation, which is an organization in Atlanta, working nationally, and several other partners to host what we call a Next Generation Forest Ambassadors program, and that's for 14 to 17-year-olds. And we bring a mix of urban and rural youth together to really experience and learn about the outdoors and learn about ways that they can go back and share their stewardship of public lands with their communities. and how they can really go back and be change leaders. So it's hosting those youth summits and education summits together, and we're doing that regionally in different areas up and down the trail.
As a kid, I would have loved to have gone out in the woods. I'm not sure people necessarily do as kids. Are you finding a receptive audience with young people now?
Yes, and many places that we host these summits, we have an application process just so we get a diverse group coming together to learn from each other and different life experiences and different skill sets. But we do have great interest, and we also host Next Generation Advisory Council, which I had mentioned as wonderful advisors for us. And that application, that's been growing now we've had it for about 5 years. And the applications that we get in is super competitive. They're amazing from all over the country. So definitely interest in serving in that way and participating.
I had no intention of trying to make you have an uncomfortable conversation, but your day is probably full of those sort of things. So, I think it's important that we're aware about it and that we welcome everybody on the trail. What the good news about all of this, in my opinion, is that when you actually get out on the trail, literally everybody you see out there kind of wants to be your friend and wants to be friendly enough with you. So people shouldn't worry about it and be concerned about it, that it's cliquey, because one place that I've noticed on the trail, it is the biggest equalizer of all. And so I was hiking for 2 days once with an 18-year-old kid. I would never have done that in real life. But, because he was there and I was there and we happened to be at the same shelter at the same time, we walked together for 2 days. That's so unusual, And so if you're black, white, pink, blue, whatever you are, gay, straight, you will find a home on the trail. So I'm glad that you're doing this. And I think it's a really important job you're doing.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming to join us. I know there's a link which I base my notes, my vague notes, and I'll put that link in the show notes because I think this is an important thing for people to read.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Thanks a lot. Bye.
Bye.
But she hadn't finished. When we said our goodbyes, she recorded one more thing that she had wanted to say. So I said, let's record again. So here she is. So Julie and I were talking again, and we carried on talking after we recorded, and she wanted to mention something else. So the Affinity Groups, talk about that then, Julie.
Yeah, I think it's an important space and way for us to bring like-minded people and together. And so one example is our Wild East Women and Women's Group that has started, and it's an opportunity for volunteers to come together and define their own focus and objectives. And at first, this group was looking at focusing on women's work days. And this year, we obviously had to pivot and have looked at other women's walkabout and having virtual happy hours together to talk about how folks have gone out and hiking on their own and then come together. And it's a wonderful way for us to celebrate the trail together. And then another.
Oh, by the way, calling yourself the Wild East Women might attract the wrong sort of people. You never know.
I don't know. Oh, there are all the right kinds of people. But we started it under Suzanne's leadership with the Wild East and that campaign. And it really is beyond just the AT. So that's why we were calling it the Wild East.
Yeah.
And then another example is we are supporting a Latinx partnership coordinator who this year also had to pivot in terms of doing events on trail, but we were able to host a Latinx campfire chat, and she hosted a cooking series of folks cooking different things outside and posting it. It was really fun.
Cool. They're the ones you didn't want to not mention, so we got those in. So thanks for joining us again. And I'm going to put this link in the show notes so you can learn all about Jedi.
Thank you.
Okay, bye then. That was fascinating to me. When the Director of Education and Outreach is, well, I wouldn't say struggling, but trying to find the right phrase to talk about this subject, it is revealing how much division this can cause. I often edit a bunch of ums and ers out of a conversation, or certainly of my guest's conversation. I normally leave mine in. But this week, for that part of Julie's talk, I left them in. Please forgive me, Julie, but I wanted listeners to hear how careful you were being. And rightly so, by the way. But that in itself is quite revealing as to where we are. Now, in response to me seeing something on Facebook, I've invited Wim Schalken on the show for a couple of minutes to tell us about his new 2020 medal. Here's Wim. A couple of weeks ago on Facebook, I saw a great post from Hiker Medals. If you remember, Hiker Medals came on the show and sponsored us, and it was great to meet Wim Schalken. And by the way, hi Wim, how are you?
I'm great, thank you. How are you?
I'm good. And Wim has made medals for all different trails, and I've got several of those medals myself. But he's now made a 2020 Through Hikers medal. And I'm going to describe it to you, then I'm going to ask Wim to talk about it because I think it was great. It's got a COVID mask, which I thought was pretty damn cool. And it's got the 2020 numbers all kind of askew and knocked all over the place. And I thought it was a fantastic representation of what happened this year. So, as you know, I reached out to you just to say congratulations first, but tell us how you came up with this.
Yeah, it was funny, right? So with the pandemic, I actually did get a lot of questions from people that wanted to have a medal for running a virtual race, right? I'm pretty active in the running community.
Right.
And I'm like, I'm hiker medals. I'm not running medals, right? There's plenty of other companies that do that. So I wasn't really too keen on doing that. And then at some point in time, you saw all the pictures with the wildfires. It was devastating to see that, right? Especially the impact it had on people that were on the trails or had been planning for so long and they had to cancel. The one thing about these pictures they were gorgeous. If you saw the scenery and then the orange and
sure.
it was beautiful with the sun through it. And I thought, man, it would be great for a medal. But I thought, well, who's going to buy that? But I could do a JMT in COVID time or something like that.
Sure.
But then I did think, you know what, I'm going to make a 2020 medal. And that's how it came about. So I made the design for the scenery of the wildfires. You don't see flames, but it's just the scenery, hills, and then honestly, still these beautiful colors. The sun is coming through, yes. But it's covered up with a mask.
That is the best. That is, I didn't see the mask straight away. I was actually struck by the 2020 numbers all over the place. Yeah. Which what was that? Was that because, as I said, it looks like it's because it all came apart?
It's right? All falling apart, right? And what you see, there's a lot of detail in the medal. If you look at the medal where the 2020 is, you actually see it looks as if the 2020 the numbers were glued on there. And then they just fell off, right? It's exactly how the whole year has been, right? You think you're going to go down a path and it all comes apart. Yeah. And so that's how that came about. Yeah, so it's all falling apart.
So what's people's reaction been to that?
It's amazing. The funny thing is that I got several customers telling me they liked it because it's a generic medal. Sure. Because what I do is, so I offer free engraving with this one. So in general, the idea was, okay, if you want to remember 2020, right? And in general, okay, what were the things you were not able to do? But now I'm kind of encouraging people, celebrate what you were able to do in 2020.
Damn right. I agree with that. I totally agree with that.
And I do have a few customers that really, they have the whole list of everything they were planning. And people, because I don't give any restriction, just give me whatever you want and I'll make it fit on the back.
Sure.
And they write a whole novel. But then I do my best one was it's a mom and she's giving it to her whole family. And she said something like, how much she appreciates her family pot, right? That's been, that's been one of the good things as well, right? We're spending more time with each other, with the family, no life slows down a bit. And she's giving it, I think, for Christmas probably, but that was the engraving on the back, and that really touched me. I thought, this is really beautiful. I'm
sure you see some wonderful things on there. And so how can, and if you're, with your permission, by the way, I saved the picture on Facebook and I put it on the show notes if that's okay.
I want
people to see it because it looks so damn great. I tell you, it really does. So tell us, how do people get it from you then?
Oh, well, thank you. So they can go to hikermedals.com. And it's right on there. You can't miss it. And if you use the discount code MightyBlue, you get a 20% off. And again, engraving is free. And it just go to it's a limited edition, and it has been pretty popular. I mean, we'll be fine for the next few weeks, but keep that a little bit in mind. It is a limited edition. I only have a limited amount remaining.
Yeah, well, look, I tell you what, I was very proud to have been associated with you because I thought it was a great thing for you to have done. And I really loved it. And I still love it. When I downloaded the photograph today, I then blew it up on my computer as well. It just looks terrific. So I strongly advise everybody just to look in the show notes, see the picture, and then go and order one, because it's for the person who's done it this year. It's been a special year for a lot of different reasons. And I think it's a perfect commemoration of that. So I appreciate you coming on and telling us about it.
Well, thank you very much, Steve. I really appreciate it.
Okay, buddy. Take it easy, all right?
Bye-bye.
Bye. I've never been a discount code before. How exciting. Just type in the code Mighty Blue and Wim will give you money off. It's a bargain, and I'll put a picture of the 2020 show of the 2020 medal in the show notes. Finally, Larry Luxembourg's Walking the Appalachian Trail. And this week, Larry introduces us to a bloke who decided to start his AT hike in a, let's just say, somewhat unorthodox way. I'll see you next week. Jumpstart. Springer Mountain, the beginning. The days pass and never return, and the south still waits for you. Take the adventure, heed the call, now, ere the irrevocable moment passes. 'Tis but a banging of the door behind you, a blithesome step forward, and you are out of the old life and into the new. The Adventurer to the Water Rat, from Wind in the Willows by Kenneth Grahame. No one ever began an Appalachian Trail through hike with more panache than Roby Hensley. In the hiking community, he has only one name, Jumpstart. After retiring as postmaster of Judkins, Tennessee, Roby began a search for new challenges. On his second flight on a hazy, blustery day, Roby parachuted out of a small plane piloted by son Steve. He landed 8,000 feet below among the rocks and dense tree cover at the very top of Springer Mountain, Georgia, not far from the plaque marking the southern end of the 2147-mile-long Appalachian Trail, AT. Hensley's story is only one of countless fascinating journeys. Each year, as many as 2,000 people start out to hike the whole AT. Nearly 200 report to the Appalachian Trail Conference, ATC, that they have done so. It's anyone's guess how many others hike the trail and never report it. Most backpackers who set out to hike the entire trail in 1 year begin at the small visitor centre at the base of Amicalola Falls, Tumbling Waters in Cherokee. In a few strides they will enter some pretty woods and begin climbing the steep, rugged 8-mile approach trail to Springer Mountain. The first mile parallels the falls, which drops 729 feet in 7 cascades, making it the highest waterfall east of the Rocky Mountains. When the early hikers passed through Amicalola Falls State Park, it was a park in name only, with one narrow road. Today, although the park continues to be developed, it is still surprisingly remote and wild. Usually, hikers begin by signing their first trail register at Amicalola. These huge notebooks in which people share their thoughts are the heart of the trail's efficient grapevine. They reveal hikers who are nervous but enthusiastic. Reality has yet to sink in. Not until the Katahdin Stream Ranger Station register, more than 2,000 miles away in Maine, will such widespread high spirits be evident again. In the meantime, there will be complaints and miseries, joys and sorrows, blisters, cold, hunger and thirst, panoramic views, and an abundance of good fellowship. Sometimes the AT does not meet hikers' expectations. Within days, the hardships lead many to abandon the trail. Among them are some who dreamed of the AT for a decade or more. Bad weather, steep climbs, hard ground, and aching bones all take a toll. The first time on Springer, I had a daunting feeling, said Leonard, habitual hiker Atkins. What am I doing here? Maine's a ways up there. I was excited and full of self-doubts. I was questioning why I was there. On the approach trail, I thought, if this is what it's like the whole way, I'm in trouble. It felt strange, said Bill Stats Godric Gunderson, a 1989 through hiker. I didn't know anybody. It's like going off to college. Suddenly you're tossed into a new world. Mitch Breeze Keeler arrived at Springer with his mother, brother and a grandfather who had built some of the AT in the 1930s. I felt a minor panic attack when they left, Mitch said. I walked 200 yards down the trail and sat down and had a snack. I felt like I was the biggest fool on earth 1 minute, like I was going to do it the next. Soon I picked myself up and by the end of the day I'd met a lot of lifelong buddies. Your first week, you'll think, I'm way down in Georgia and I'm already exhausted, said Henry Phillips. No wonder so many people drop out the first week. Then the second week, blisters set in. In Georgia, it's straight up and straight down. 6 miles is a big deal. You think, how am I ever going to get to Katahdin? But then you start wondering just what's around the next bend. You know if you stay in one place, nothing exciting is going to happen. Peter, the Cheshire Cat Van Huy, who came to the AT as a novice backpacker, found everything so new and wonderful that the initial stretch was magical. Since 1958, Springer has been the southern end of the AT. The previous terminus, Mount Oglethorpe, is a more dramatic mountain, but construction of a gravel logging road on Oglethorpe led to vandalism. Pungent chicken farms along the route also helped persuade the Georgia Appalachian Trail Club, GATC, to find a different trailhead. In many ways, Springer is a more appropriate place for the trail to start. Here a hiker abruptly enters the wilderness of the Chattahoochee National Forest and remains in forest so lush with understory that it prompted one early through hiker to call the AT the Long Green Tunnel. Although it's revered among hikers for its prominent role on the AT, Springer, at 3,782 feet, is an otherwise anonymous mountain. Unlike its northern counterpart, Mount Katahdin, Springer has little history or myth associated with it. Katahdin, with its panoramic views, stands alone, the centrepiece of the main wilderness. Springer is just one of many beautiful mountains in a rugged part of North Georgia. Springer's twin distinctions are that it unites the two branches of the southern Blue Ridge Mountains and is the southern end of the AT. No one seems sure how Springer Mountain got its name. The most common story is that a family named Springer lived on the mountain in the 19th century. According to Whit Benson, former GATC president, local legend held that the mountaineer was not of outstanding repute. In fact, when the trail shifted from Mount Oglethorpe, GATC looked into this story and investigated earlier Cherokee names for the mountain. Nothing satisfactory came of this effort, however. Springer had been the name on all 20th century maps and the name by which local people knew the mountain. Whatever the origins, Springer is quite a change from a prior name, Penitentiary Mountain. AT founder Benton Mackay's first map of the proposed trail route put the southern end on North Carolina's Mount Mitchell at 6,684 feet, the highest peak in the east. Other sites considered for the southern terminus were Lookout Mountain in Tennessee and Cohada Mountain in Georgia. Mackay showed a spur trail running the whole way to Stone Mountain near Atlanta. Legend has it that a backpacker can equip himself with the gear he finds abandoned on the first few miles of the trail, but don't count on it. Sonny Lightheagle Shams, a 1988 through hiker who now is a ranger at Amicalola, says that on a single trip up to Springer, she picked up an insulated down jacket, 2 wool sweaters, 100 feet of climbing rope, and a lot of fuel. One day, 2 girls left Amicalola for Springer Mountain, each carrying a gallon of Coleman fuel, maybe enough to get them to Maine. The staff tried to dissuade the girls, but you can't tell a person you don't need it, Sonny said. You can tell them there's going to be fuel at Neal's Gap, 40 miles away. How much are you going to use here to there? 28 miles and maybe 3 days after starting the AT, hikers reached Blood Mountain. They survived the first big temptation to quit, the highway crossing at Woody Gap, where one can hitchhike into Suches, Georgia, and a bus home. The summit of Blood Mountain, 4,461 feet, the highest point on the AT in Georgia, offers views far into the distance. The mountain takes its name from a battle between the Cherokee and Creek Indians. The Cherokee inhabited the northern half of Georgia into Virginia until most were forced to march west to Oklahoma in the deadly 1838 Trail of Tears. Of the 16,000 who began the winter march, 4,000 died en route. The Cherokee left their mark along the way in names such as Chattahoochee, stone and marked or flowered, and Nantahala, land of the noonday sun, national forests, through which the AT runs in Georgia and North Carolina. Neal's Gap was formerly Wolassee, place of the Frogs or Frogtown Gap, but was renamed after an engineer who put a highway through the gap in 1930. The Wolassee Centre, built as a lodge for Civilian Conservation Corps (CCC) workers in 1933 and converted to an inn in 1937, has been serving hikers for decades. Pressure to push the Cherokee out grew intense after the discovery of gold in stream beds near Dahlonega, Georgia, in 1828, resulting in what is billed as America's first gold rush, although North Carolina claims a slightly earlier one. Tourists can still pan for gold in the area. The gold was so pretty, there's no other gold in the world like it, a local miner claimed. It was so pure as 98.6% right out of the ground. Gold was so plentiful here that in 1838, the same year as the Trail of Tears, a US branch mint opened in Dahlonega. The name Dahlonega is said to be the Cherokee name for precious yellow or gold. World War II marked the end of large-scale mining in the Georgia mountains. Once hikers make the steep descent from Blood Mountain into Neal's Gap, good fortune awaits. Here, Dorothy and Jeff Hansen have been operating mountain crossings at Willows Center for 10 years. Hikers not as prepared as they thought or unexpectedly weary find a place to stay, good food, a warm atmosphere, expert advice, and a store well equipped with practical backpacking gear. They will pass through a breezeway, the only place on the AT where the trail goes under a roof. Dorothy Hansen thru-hiked in 1979, and Jeff has been an outdoor educator most of his life. Their staff includes experienced hikers such as 1987 2,000-miler Wayne Sky King. Jeff is renowned on the AT for examining hikers' packs and helping them discard much of what they thought was already the barest of essentials. Each year, from the Hansen place alone, the 800 or so hikers who visit send home 4,000 pounds of gear, 10% of pack weight. Some shed as much as 30 pounds. Many continue to prune pounds as they go. As Peter Van Wy points out, it's all too easy to end up with a 72-pound pack full of lightweight backpacking gear. Among the ridiculous items discarded at Willows have been scuba gear, hardbound books, big hatchets and large iron pans. Either the heavy gear or the people carrying it are soon gone from the trail. Jeff Hansen believes hikers have gotten better at picking gear each year, but mentally they are no better prepared than ever. Yet most experienced hikers say that attitude and determination are the keys to a successful thru-hike. Equipment problems, after all, can be overcome. Jeff says that too many people believe that if I just get my equipment right, all that's left is the walking. They don't understand that what's inside their head is more important than what's on their back. It's you walking the trail, not the gear, he adds. The North Georgia mountains are so rugged that the elite Army Rangers have based their mountain training programs there since 1952. Hikers are well advised to camp at or near the first 4 shelters along the trail because Ranger training includes frequent night patrols which can cross the AT. The Rangers try to avoid hikers and in particular the shelter areas. Hikers can take comfort knowing that if Ranger trainees stumble on civilians, they receive a lower grade. Hikers can also be assured that what these Rangers go through in their 17-day stint in these mountains is infinitely more difficult than the thru-hikers' transit. Rangers arrive at Camp Frank D. Merrill, named after the commander of Merrill's Marauders during World War II, by parachute, and as Jumpstart found out, there's not much open country here. While at Camp Merrill, the soldiers learn rappelling, patrolling and other skills. They get little food or sleep. A typical Ranger loses as much as 40 pounds during his 68-day training program, twice what an average AT hiker loses in 5 to 6 months on the trail. Profile: Roby, Jumpstart, Hensley. Except for a faded t-shirt with a picture of a parachutist and the label Jumpstart, nothing about Roby Hensley looks extraordinary. Still vigorous at 70, he's tackling new trails and challenges. I called up to him in mid-March 1993, shortly after the big blizzard. He'd spent much of the day on top of a neighbour's tree doing some trimming after having done some rock work building a fireplace for his daughter. Other hikers think I'm either crazy or unique, Roby said. Even now, when I'm on the Pacific Crest Trail in California, I run across hikers and they all know about my jump. I'm surprised at the number of hikers who've heard of me. On March the 9th, 1986, when Roby Jumpstart Hensley planned to begin his first AT thru-hike, Springer Mountain was fogged in. Son Steve, piloting a Cessna 182, took a look at the drop site and returned to the airport. An hour and a half later, they tried again. By this time, the fog had cleared, but the wind was still fierce. Roby's daughter Sherry, son-in-law Dave and Dave's brother Don, waiting on top of Springer with Roby's backpack, launched a red smoke grenade to guide him to his landing site. To Steve, the jump target looked like a postage stamp on the side of the mountain. He considered refusing to let his father jump, but figured he'd just find another pilot. Roby is a very determined man, he wrote in the introduction to Roby's Appalachian Trail Journal. Because of the high winds, Roby jumped 2 miles upward of Springer. Even then, I had to hold against the wind until I got to the little clearing on top, Roby said. I got caught in a downdraft and dropped in the trees, right near the start of the trail, within a stone's throw of the top marker. There was nothing but woods as far as you could see. His canopy was caught in 2 trees, leaving him dangling between them like a grasshopper in a spider web. Recalling the jump, he said, "All it took was guts. I wouldn't attempt it again under those conditions." Newly married, Roby returned to the trail in 1988 for a second through hike, this time with his wife Lana. His family was relieved when this time he started the trail like everyone else, walking up Springer Mountain. Roby had tried to take up parachuting several times earlier, but gave up when people at the local club told him he was too old. "I finally started jumping when I was 50, he said. "I've done nearly 500 jumps. I quit logging my jumps at 400. Once he did a demonstration jump in Tennessee for President Reagan. He likes to drop in, literally, on neighbours who are having a cookout, and even at 70 he does about a dozen jumps a year. One year he made an unscheduled jump into the gathering of the Appalachian Long Distance Hikers Association, ALDA, at Pipestem, West Virginia. His only jumping injuries have been several sprained ankles, a small broken bone in his leg, and bruises. "I wasn't scared in the first place when I started jumping," he said. "I just decided that when your time comes, that's it. Until then, I'll do what I want to do." He first became interested in the AT in the 1930s, when he worked for the Civilian Conservation Corps near the trail and hiked a little of it. After retiring, he welcomed the challenge of hiking long distances. Already a scuba diver and skydiver, he wanted something else. During World War II, the military rejected him several times because he had flat feet, convinced he wouldn't be able to tolerate walking with a pack. Since he retired in 1985, he's backpacked more than 6,000 miles. On that first through hike, Roby didn't have to subsist on peanut butter and jelly sandwiches and macaroni and cheese like most hikers. Instead, Steve flew over the trail 5 times and dropped hot food such as roast beef, pizza and fried chicken. Roby also obtained food along the trail. Most hikers dismiss the notion of gathering edible plants, hunting and fishing along the trail. For one thing, the 14 to 15 miles that most single-year through hikers average per day doesn't leave much time or energy for gathering food. For another, it would be a logistical nightmare to obtain hunting and fishing licenses and information for all 14 states through which the trail passes. Steve, offshore Steve Gomez, probably as devoted a fisherman as anyone who's ever hiked the trail, didn't even attempt to fish during his through hike. Another avid hunter and fisherman, Henry Phillips, says, "It's a big misconception that you can find your own food as you go along. Do the Yule Gibbons thing. There's no place in this country where you can do that." Roby probably picked up more food along the way than nearly any other hiker. Although he had never backpacked a day before hiking the AT, he had hunted and fished and was quite comfortable in the woods. On his through hike, Roby saw a cornucopia where others saw nothing but brambles and brush. He carried fishing equipment and caught fish, captured net bullfrogs, crawdads and snakes, picked hickory nuts and a wide assortment of berries, mushrooms, fruits and other edible plants, gathered clams from a lake in Maine, and in late summer and early fall found corn, grapes and apples. His journal is sprinkled with delightful down-home country humour. Trying to hitchhike for a long time in southern Virginia, he wrote, "I thought I might get a blister on my thumb from waving it in the air. At Charlie's Bunyan, a mountain in the Smokies with a sheer drop, I thought if a fellow fell from here, he'd have to take his lunch to keep from starving to death before he hit bottom." On a rainy day in Maine, it was so foggy the birds were walking. Roby wrote articles en route for his hometown newspaper, and some of his readers sent him encouraging mail. "I felt that I was hiking for them, for all those people who, for whatever reason, wanted to be out there, but couldn't be. I kept feeding them all my experiences. That encouraged me so much I never felt alone." To avoid severe cold and snow at the northern end of the trail, he took a bus from Harper's Ferry, West Virginia, near the trail's midpoint, to Mount Katahdin and began hiking south. Near the end of his trip, he wrote, "I think I'll be living my life differently when I return to that faster world." Speaking of the changes that came from hiking the trail, he said, "I got rid of a lot of things. If there was malice or hatred, I got rid of it. You get your priorities in order. You look inside, see who this person is, where you want to go." When he finished the trail at Harper's Ferry, he'd changed so much that his daughter didn't recognise him. He was 42 pounds lighter and had a long white beard. Summing up, he wrote, "Now that I've reached my destination, I realise it wasn't the destination that was important. It was the journey. It was hard work, but rest and food have never been as sweet. I've been in bad weather and on dangerous terrain, and have discovered that strength and youth aren't as valuable as persistence is. And mostly, I've just been overwhelmed by beauty. Every day, every direction I looked, I won't ever forget it."